They smashed his face with a bottle. Blood everywhere. Old man collapsed on the dirty floor. "You lost in Vietnam. You're gonna lose here too." They laughed. But what they didn't know was that 6 quiet men sitting in the corner booth were his Navy SEAL brothers. And now, those laughs were about to turn into screams. The Anchor Tavern sat in the heart of Millfield, a small coastal town where fog rolled in every evening and the salty air carried stories of old fishermen and forgotten wars. This wasn't some fancy establishment, cracked vinyl seats, sticky floors, and a bartender who'd seen more bar fights than a bouncer in Vegas. But for the locals, especially the veterans, it was home. That Tuesday evening started like any other. Tony "Shark" Martinez sat alone at the corner bar, his weathered hands wrapped around a cold Budweiser. At 72, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd seen hell and walked back out. His denim jacket was worn thin, and on the left shoulder, barely visible in the dim light, was a faded Navy SEAL patch. The lines in Tony's face told stories he'd never shared. The slight limp in his left leg came from stepping on a landmine in the Mekong Delta. The tremor in his hands wasn't age, it was Agent Orange, slowly poisoning his system 50 years later. But tonight, Tony carried a heavier weight. That morning, Dr. Peterson had delivered the news with clinical detachment: stage 3 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe 8, if he was lucky. But the real shock was the 6 men in the corner booth. Mike "Thunder" Rodriguez sat with his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room. At 68, he still carried himself like the Force Recon Marine he'd been before cross-training with the SEAL. His gray beard couldn't hide the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. Dave "Phantom" Chen looked like a retired accountant, thin, quiet, wire-rimmed glasses. People would never guess he held the record for longest confirmed sniper shot in SEAL Team 3's history. 84 yards, 1 shot, 1 kill. Rick "Steel" Johnson commanded attention without saying a word. 6'3", built like a linebacker at 69, his presence filled the room. The tattoo on his forearm, an anchor surrounded by fallen teammates' names, was his only concession to sentimentality. Paul "Ghost" Williams earned his nickname by moving through enemy territory like smoke. Small, wiry, with the kind of face you'd forget, except for the eyes. Combat photographer turned intelligence operative. Jake "Venom" Torres was the medic who'd kept them alive when everything went to hell. His hands had pulled shrapnel from more bodies than he could count, sewn up wounds that should have been fatal. Sam "Titan" Brooks rounded out the group. Communications specialist, the guy who called in airstrikes that saved their asses more times than they could remember. These days, he barely spoke above a whisper, vocal cords damaged by years of shouting into radio handsets. SEAL Team 3, 1969-1975. They'd been through hell together. Every month, same day, same time, same book. They'd meet at the Anchor and sit in comfortable silence, sharing memories without words. The bar's rhythm was disrupted when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the frame. 4 young men stumbled in, Brad Morrison and his crew, 28 years old, trust fund baby who'd never worked a real day in his life, built like he spent more time taking gym selfies than actually lifting weights. Behind him came Tyler Jenkins, Marcus Webb, and Danny Foster, sycophants whose greatest accomplishments were getting thrown out of community college and never being in a real fight. They'd been bar-hopping all evening, celebrating Brad's latest victory, a hit-and-run charge that disappeared when Daddy's money changed hands. "Hey, bartender," Brad shouted across the room, "get us your strongest stuff, top shelf only. We're celebrating tonight." The 4 claimed a table in the center, making sure everyone noticed their presence. Their voices carried as they recounted exaggerated stories that grew more elaborate with each retelling. "Look at this place," Brad said loudly. "Bunch of old has-beens living in the past, probably still fighting a war they lost 50 years ago." Tyler laughed too loud. "Yeah, what's with all the military shit on the walls? We get it, you served. Move on with your lives." Marcus chimed in, "My dad always said guys who brag about military service are compensating for something." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. The 6 men in the corner booth didn't move, but their posture changed, like wolves catching a scent. Annie Foster pointed directly at Tony. Hey, look at Grandpa over there, still wearing his little military patch like it means something. Dude, Vietnam was like 100 years ago. Get over it. The room went completely quiet. Tony slowly turned on his bar stool to face the four young men. His eyes locked onto Brad's with predator intensity. Son, Tony said quietly, you might want to think real careful about what you say next. Brad felt something cold run down his spine, but alcohol and arrogance pushed him forward. He stood up, swaying, and walked toward the bar with his chest puffed out. Or what, old man? You gonna tell me war stories? Gonna cry about your buddies who didn't make it home? Brad's voice dripped with mockery. Face it, Grandpa. Your generation lost. You went to some jungle, got your asses kicked by farmers with rifles, and came home with your tails between your legs. Tony stood up slowly, movements deliberate and controlled. At 72, he wasn't the physical specimen he'd once been, but there was something in his posture that suggested coiled violence. I was 19 years old when I first killed a man, Tony said conversationally. Viet Cong sniper in a tree about 200 yards out. One shot, center mass. He fell like a sack of wet cement. Brad's smirk faltered, but he pressed on. Tough guy, huh? Bet you feel real proud shooting people who couldn't shoot back. Oh, they shot back plenty, Tony replied, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a spider web of scars. This one came from AK-47 fire during the Tet Offensive. This one was from a grenade fragment in Cambodia. And this one was from a knife fight in Saigon. Brad's pride wouldn't let him back down. So what? You want a medal for doing what you were paid to do? Nobody asked you to go. You volunteered to kill people for money. That doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a mercenary. That's when Tony's composure cracked. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Brad's wrist and pressed his thumb into a pressure point that sent lightning bolts of pain up the younger man's arm. With his right hand, he seized Brad's throat, applying just enough pressure to make breathing uncomfortable. Listen real careful, boy, Tony whispered. I've killed 89 men in combat. Not soldiers. Men. Fathers. Sons. Brothers. I've looked into their eyes as the life left their bodies. He increased the pressure slightly. But every single one of those men died fighting for something they believed in. They died with honor, even if they were my enemy. You've never believed in anything but your own comfort. You're not worthy to speak their name. Brad's three friends started forward, but stopped when they heard chairs scraping across the wooden floor. 6 men stood up in perfect unison, their movements coordinated despite decades since they'd last operated as a unit. They didn't rush forward or make threats. They simply stood, and that was enough to freeze Brad's backup crew. Mike Thunder Rodriguez stepped forward first, his massive frame casting a shadow across the younger men. You boys having some trouble over here? He asked politely, but there was steel in his voice. Dave Phantom Chen appeared at Brad's left shoulder so quietly that the young man jumped. For a 70-year-old man, he moved with silent grace. Rick Steele Johnson took position behind Brad's friends, cutting off their escape route. His smile was pleasant, almost grandfatherly, but his eyes promised violence. Paul Ghost Williams materialized beside the bar, his camera hanging around his neck. He raised it and took a quick photo. For documentation purposes, he explained with a slight smile. In case anyone tries to claim this was unprovoked, Jake Venom Torres positioned himself near the back exit, medical bag at his side. Sam Titan Brooks remained by the table but pulled out his cell phone. Should I call this in to base? Sam whispered, his damaged vocal cords making the whisper carry further than normal speaking. The implication was clear. These weren't just 6 old men. They were a unit, still operational, still connected. Tony released Brad's throat but maintained his grip on the wrist. Now you're going to apologize to every veteran in this bar. Then you're going to walk out and never come back. But Brad Morrison had never learned when to quit. As soon as Tony loosened his grip, Brad jerked free and stepped back. Alcohol and humiliation overrode whatever common sense he possessed. Fuck you, old man. You think I'm scared of some senile old soldiers? My father owns half this town. I could have this shithole condemned tomorrow. Tyler Jenkins found his courage in liquid stupidity. Yeah, we're not afraid of you has-beens. The 6 SEALs exchanged glances, silent communication they'd developed over years in hostile territory. In seconds, they'd assessed the situation and formulated a response. But before they could act, Brad made the biggest mistake of his life. In his drunken rage, he grabbed an empty beer bottle and smashed it against the bar. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I'll show you who's tough," Brad screamed, brandishing the jagged glass. "Come on, tough guy." Tony looked at the broken bottle with detached curiosity. "Son, you really don't want to do this." "Shut up. You think you're so tough because you killed rice farmers 50 years ago. This isn't Vietnam. This is my town." The attack came without warning. Brad lunged forward with the broken bottle aiming for Tony's face. But Tony's reflexes, while sharp, were slowed by age. The jagged glass caught him across the left temple, opening a gash that immediately began bleeding. Tony staggered backward, his hand going to the wound. When he pulled it away, his fingers were covered in blood. "There," Brad shouted triumphantly. "How's that feel, hero? You lost in Vietnam, and you just lost here too." The room erupted. Tyler grabbed a chair and swung it at Dave Chen. The old sniper ducked with fluid grace and drove his elbow into Tyler's solar plexus. Tyler collapsed, gasping. Marcus threw a wild punch at Rick Johnson. The former demolitions expert caught it, twisted Marcus's wrist until bones ground together, and drove him face first into the wall. Danny tried to run but found Jake Torres blocking his path. Jake applied a sleeper hold that dropped Danny in seconds. But the real violence was just beginning. Tony wiped blood from his eyes and looked at Brad with cold fury. "You have no idea what you just did, boy." Brad raised the bottle again. "Stay back. I'll cut you again." That's when Mike Thunder Rodriguez moved. At 68, Mike covered the distance in 3 quick steps, his hand clamping down on Brad's wrist with crushing force. The bottle fell and shattered. "You cut our brother," Mike said quietly. "That was a mistake." Paul was already at Tony's side, pressing a towel against the wound. Jake began treating it with battlefield efficiency. Sam had moved to the door and locked it. "No one leaves until this is settled." Rick dragged the unconscious Marcus to the center and dropped him next to Tyler and Danny. Brad found himself alone, surrounded, his friends defeated. "Please," he whispered, all arrogance gone. "I didn't mean. I was drunk. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix our brother's face," Mike replied. "Sorry doesn't take back what you said about men who died for this country. You attacked a Navy SEAL with a broken bottle," Rick added. "Do you know what the penalty used to be?" Tony, his wound bandaged, stood up slowly. "Let me tell you what we did in Vietnam, boy. Not for medals or recognition. We did it because it was right." His voice took on a distant quality. "Intelligence about a planned attack on a refugee camp. 2,000 civilians, women, children, old men. Command said it was too risky, too politically sensitive." Dave picked up the story. "The attack was coming that night. Regular forces were 3 days away. We went anyway," Mike added. 6 men against 50 Viet Cong regulars. "We chose to fight," Rick continued. 6 Navy SEALs and whatever the camp defenders could manage. "The attack came at midnight," Jake remembered. "Mortar fire first, then infantry assault from 3 directions. Fighting lasted until dawn," Sam whispered. 47 enemy dead, 0 civilian casualties. We saved 2,000 lives that night." Tony concluded. "Nobody outside our unit ever knew about it. We didn't do it for recognition. We did it because someone had to stand between innocent people and the darkness." The silence was profound. "That's what we did," Tony said to Brad. "You've never served anything bigger than yourself. You've never known what it means to be part of something that matters." Brad's face had changed completely. "I don't know how," he admitted, voice small and ashamed. The veterans exchanged glances again. "Maybe it's time you learned," Tony said, extending his hand. "My name is Tony Martinez. I served 3 tours in Vietnam with SEAL Team 3. I've killed 89 men in combat, saved countless lives, and seen things that still wake me up in cold sweats." He paused. But I'm also someone who believes people can change if they're given the chance. This is your chance. Slowly, Brad reached out and shook Tony's hand. What do I have to do? He asked. First, clean up this mess. Pay for damages. Drive me to the ER, Tony said. Then you're going to learn what service really means. Every Saturday for 6 months, Mike added, you volunteer at the VA hospital. Help veterans who came home broken. Listen to their stories, Rick continued. Really listen. Learn about sacrifice, honor, putting others first. And if you backslide, Jake warned, we'll know about it. Brad looked around at the 6 men who could have destroyed him but chose redemption instead. Why? He asked. Why give me this chance? Tony's expression grew serious. Because I'm dying, son. Cancer. Maybe 6 months left. I'd rather spend them building something up than tearing something down. The admission hit everyone like a physical blow. Even his closest friends hadn't known. Tony, why didn't you tell us? Mike asked. Because I didn't want pity. I wanted to handle it on my own terms. Bullshit, Dave said bluntly. We're brothers. Brothers don't face death alone. SEAL Team 3 doesn't leave anyone behind, Sam whispered. Not in Vietnam. Not now. 3 months later, the anchor was different. Brad came every Tuesday sitting with the veterans, listening to their stories. The arrogant bully was gone, replaced by someone learning what service meant. Tony still sat at the corner bar, but now he wasn't alone. His brothers surrounded him, and increasingly, Brad was there too, not as an outsider, but as someone earning his place through changed behavior. The cancer was winning its war, but Tony was winning something more important. He was building a legacy. Brad had become the town's veteran advocate, defending any military member from disrespect or neglect. But the transformation went deeper than anyone expected. Every Saturday, as promised, Brad volunteered at the VA hospital. At first, he was clumsy, uncertain, clearly out of his element among men who'd seen combat. But gradually, something changed. He learned to listen, really listen, as elderly veterans shared stories they'd never told their own families. There was Frank Sullivan, a Korean War vet who'd lost both legs to a mine, but refused to let anyone feel sorry for him. Brad spent hours learning to play chess with Frank, losing every single game but gaining something more valuable, perspective on what real strength looked like. There was Maria Santos, one of the few female veterans at the facility, who'd served as a combat medic in Iraq. She taught Brad about invisible wounds, PTSD, survivor's guilt, the weight of memories that never faded. Through her stories, he began to understand what Tony and his brothers carried every day. And there was Jimmy "Doc" Harrison, a Vietnam-era corpsman who'd worked alongside Navy SEALs during some of their most dangerous missions. When Jimmy learned about Brad's connection to Tony Martinez, his eyes lit up with recognition. Shark Martinez. Hell, I patched that crazy bastard up more times than I can count. Jimmy laughed, his weathered face breaking into a grin. You know what made him special? Wasn't his kill count or his marksmanship. It was how he treated his wounded enemy. Even when they tried to kill him, he made sure they got medical attention. That's the measure of a man right there. These stories began to reshape Brad's understanding of heroism. It wasn't about the violence of war, it was about the humanity that survived it. The real heroes weren't the ones who killed the most enemies, but the ones who kept their souls intact while doing what duty demanded. Tony watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. During their Tuesday evening conversations at the Anchor, he could see the change in Brad's eyes, the arrogance replaced by humility, the selfishness replaced by service, the anger replaced by understanding. One evening, Tony pulled out a small metal coin, a Navy SEAL challenge coin. This isn't yours, he told Brad, but you can carry it. It reminds you, real strength is protecting those who can't protect themselves. Brad took the coin reverently. I'll never forget what you taught me. Tony smiled, his weathered face peaceful. Then we did our job. We turned an enemy into an ally, hate into understanding. 6 months later, Tony Martinez passed away peacefully, surrounded by his SEAL brothers and the young man whose life he'd chosen to save instead of destroy. At the funeral, Brad Morrison delivered the eulogy. His voice shook as he began, but grew stronger with each word. He spoke about a warrior who'd shown mercy when he could have chosen vengeance, an old soldier who'd chosen to build rather than tear down, a dying man who'd used his final months to create something lasting rather than bitter. Tony Martinez could have let his brothers destroy me that night, Brad said to the packed church, his eyes finding each of the 5 remaining SEALs in the front row. I deserved it. I attacked him with a broken bottle, mocked his service, insulted everything he held sacred. But instead of revenge, he chose redemption. Instead of punishment, he chose patience. The congregation was silent as Brad continued. He taught me that true strength isn't about how much damage you can inflict. It's about how much healing you can create. He showed me that real warriors don't just fight enemies, they transform them. That day in the bar, I was his enemy, but through his wisdom and mercy, I became his brother. Brad's voice cracked slightly. Tony told me once that the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons, they're fought with words, with forgiveness, with the choice to see potential instead of just problems. He won his final battle not by destroying what was broken, but by rebuilding it into something better. The Anchor Tavern now has a plaque by the door, in memory of Tony "Shark" Martinez, Navy SEAL. He turned enemies into brothers, and every Tuesday night 6 aging warriors still gather in the corner booth, joined now by a young man who learned that true strength comes not from what you can destroy, but what you choose to build. The plaque still hangs there today, catching the light from the neon beer sign. Visitors often ask the bartender about it, and he always tells them the same story, how a dying warrior chose mercy over revenge, how a spoiled brat learned to become a man, and how 6 old soldiers proved that brotherhood never dies. Brad still carries that challenge coin in his pocket. Every morning when he gets dressed, he feels its weight and remembers Tony's words. Real strength is protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's become his daily reminder, his moral compass, his connection to something greater than himself. On quiet Tuesday nights, when the fog rolls in from the ocean and the bar grows still, you can almost feel their presence, Tony and his brothers, watching over the place that became their final battlefield. Not a battlefield of bullets and blood, but one of hearts and minds, where the greatest victory wasn't killing an enemy but saving a soul. Some battles can break lives, but some brotherhoods can rebuild them.